I think you guys can raise hands, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes,
in
they
the
can.
setting. So just on a raise of hands, trying to figure out where my audience is. If you could raise your hand if you're already certified on C90 and you're kind of attending to see how much I screw this up, or just to maybe learn a little more. Come on, Joe. We lost one. Okay, how many of you are training to certify at C90?
Elena, Yusuf, Yuvin, Yahya.
Okay, very cool. So, just as an introduction, my name is Mark Zameda. I've been a controller in the FAA since 2002. I was a controller at Chicago Center in the southeast area, so the Bears, Fort Wayne sectors, basically, from 2002 to 2013. And in 2013, I transferred over to Chicago TRACON, where I've been ever since. In terms of the TRACON and where you certify and whatnot, this is why I brought this page up. You start off either on the north or the south side is what we call it. South side, you would certify on all of the South Satellite sectors, sectors 1 through 4. On the north side, we have 6 departure sectors, and then we have North Satellite. For VATSIM use, we combine east and west departures. In other words, we would have an east departure and a loop departure that would work eastbounds that go south around O'Hare, because in real life, we sometimes have to split them when we're on west flow. On east flow, we would split west and what we call Kane departure for Kane County, Illinois. And using Kane departure, we would send PQs, O'Hare PQs, south around O'Hare on east flow. So they would be a 220 heading to parallel the dump boundary, which we'll go over a little bit as we move on. So you would certify on either one of those 2 walls. Then you move up front and you certify on all of O'Hare Ravel. We have the 4 final positions. We call them vectors. And it's exactly as you see here, a Z, a W, an F, and an H. And then we have 4 feeder positions, which we typically don't use the names, we use the positions. So we say the X or the E or the J or the Y. It's just quicker. So that's kind of how we do things there. When it comes to departure, we east departure, north departure, yada, yada. And for South Satellite, we're always Sector 1, Sector 2, Sector 3, or Sector 4. So that's just how we do things there. The final positions always stay the same east or west flow. So the F final is always the northernmost runway. That would be 27 right or 9 left. The Z final would be the center north runway. So that would be 27 center or 27 left, 9 center, 9 right on east flow. And then you have the W final, which have the 10 left, 10 center, or 28 center, 28 right. And then H is the far south runway. On west flow, we never use the H position. We just don't use 28 left at all yet. We keep hearing talk about possibly going to quads, but currently in real life, O'Hare Airport is a 3 Ravel runway airport with about a 2.5 runway demand, meaning we have enough aircraft. We have enough aircraft coming into O'Hare runways worth of airplanes. That works out to about 114 arrival rate. So 114 arrivals an hour. So anyways, you certify on up front, and then your CPC. You can get the last wall if you like, and we call that cross-training to become full room. I've been a full room CPC for about, a couple of years now. I forgot how many. Any questions anyone has before we go on? Okay.
Mark, I also set up a online question thing so that if anybody has any questions during that time, they can submit them, and then during any breaks, we can take a look at them.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you guys get I have no idea how that works. So Zach, I appreciate your help on the legwork on that because I'd be happy to answer any questions when we take a break and whatnot. So the next pages that I'm going to show you are basically, these are basic SOP stuff. Most of the time in the real world, we're using them, but they're extremely basic. You know, when we clear something for an ILS, RNAV, we generally don't put it in the scratch pad. We put it in real world. We put it in the plus scratch pad on CRC. They do emulate this, where you would use the implied plus command. I use my numlock plus and then ILS. The reason why is because about 5 years ago, we changed how we do airports in stars. And now all of the airports show up as the Scratchpad 1 entry on the data block. If you don't understand what I'm talking about by Scratchpad 1, Scratchpad 2, whatever, raise your hand. I can do like a quick synopsis of what I'm talking about there. But it's basically one of the things you're going to learn as you start using CRC on VATSIM. Surprisingly, VATSIM's emulation of CRC is extremely similar to what we have in real life. Okay, so prearranged coordination. I'm sure most of you have taken and passed the basic radar tests on VATSIM, so you know what a point out is. You know what a handoff is. Prearranged coordination basically is like a point out. In plain English, the way we use prearranged coordination is for departure to climb inside of arrival's airspace and go through arrival's airspace in order to climb departures. As we go through the airspace maps and I show you what that entails, you'll see that if we did not use prearranged coordination, departures would be delayed immensely and we wouldn't really be able to move traffic like we can. One thing I hope that most of you take away from this is in, say, Milwaukee and other places, you may have set airspace and a set area where you work your traffic. At C90, most of the time, you're playing in other controllers' grass. So doing what needs to be done with every single aircraft is much more important than, say, making sure you're inside your airspace, because pointouts, we affect pointouts very quickly on the floor. So it's nothing for me to, work north satellite and climb departures to 15,000 through all of departure and arrival. Yet to an arrival controller, it's just departure doing that. They have no idea who it is because we're using prearranged coordination. So do we have any questions on that? I know that wasn't the best explanation. I'm trying to do what I can ad lib here.
I don't have anything in the website or in the
How about anyone in the audience? No?
Raise your hand if you got a question.
Yeah. All right. So basically, on VATSIM, they did a really good job of simplifying what prearranged coordination is. When you have to display the position symbol and altitude information on VATSIM, you can do that by just leaving all the data blocks as limited data blocks. So make sure that you set your altitude filter limits to be able to see all of C90. I could count on one hand how many real world C90 controllers set altitude limits that are more restrictive than, say, the ground to 15 or 16,200 feet. Almost everyone has those as a bare minimum. And the reason why is because we want to be able to see what's there. We don't miss airspace, we miss airplanes. And you can't miss what you don't see. So when you set up CRC to work Chicago approach, at a bare minimum, I would have that as your altitude filter limits, the ground to 16.2. That lets you at least see that. Me personally, I go from the ground to 24. And that way, if I'm APRECing a climb and I see I got flight level 190, I can say APREC climbing to 18 and save the center control that's either approving or disapproving my request some trouble.
18's unusable, climbing to 17.
And you get some center controllers that are like that. So, so anyways, Departure basically misses all of arrival. That's your job as departure. So when you're working east departure, south departure, whatever it is, if it's departure, your job in climbing departures is to make sure you miss arrivals. The things I tell trainees when I'm training them IRL is if you have to use the word expedite or no delay or anything like that when you're telling an aircraft to climb, you have a bad climb. If arrival has to do anything like descend early, turn, or anything like that in order to miss you, you have an extremely bad climb. So make sure that when you leave 5,000 feet and climb, when arrival is online, that you don't have any arrivals that can come get you. In other words, do not get caught where you have to call the arrival controller and say, can you please stop at this altitude, or can you turn your guy because, for lack of a better word, I created a conflict for you. South Satellite, either Sector 1 or Sector 2 will be working departure southbound out of South Satellite. All depends on Midway's configuration. We'll talk about that in the future. But South Satellite misses departure and arrival. So you notice there's a little bit of a hierarchy here. South Sat will miss all of departure, and because they're acting as departure, and departure is basically taking a point out on South Satellite departures, they have to miss O'Hare arrival as well. So a couple of things to keep in mind. What does arrival own outside of their arrival dumps? Basically 7,000 through 11,000 feet. So if you're climbing to a final altitude that is 7 through 11,000 feet, think twice about leaving a safe altitude like 5 or 6,000 feet. Give me 1 second.
So essentially leaving.
Sorry about that. All right, where were we?
Stay at 5, stay alive.
Yeah, basically. And we say that a lot with our trainees. Stay at 5, stay alive. We also hypocritically say, don't be shy, pop that guy. What you'll learn as you start training at C90 on VATSIM, and what is so hard for IRL trainees to learn, is no two situations will ever be the same. What works today makes the news tomorrow is what I end up telling trainees that get frustrated about it. So keep that in mind, that learn as much as you can in your training and your sweatbox sessions so that you can maybe use something similar, but you'll have to be creative as you move on. So point out procedure, the fixes. We put this in because we had some people get a little creative, like they would pronounce bacon bason, and other fixes like Duffy. We had one guy who would pronounce it Dufay, so we had to change all that. Let's see. Most of the other stuff here is just your standards. Oh, here, approach control. So when you're working feeder or you're working final, the hard concept to understand when working feeder final is you are simply an extension of the runway traffic pattern. So if you're feeding everybody to 27 right, or you're feeding everybody to 28 center, whatever the runway is, the reason why you're there is because it would be insane to put 15 aircraft going to 27 right on one frequency. So it makes it easier to split that workload up by having one sector work 6 or 7 and the other work 6 or 7. And that's what feeders are there for. So feeding can sometimes be more complex and harder than vectoring, because you're counting miles for every runway that you feed. One thing to keep in mind on that. When you are the center high runway and you're decombined, in other words, you're going to have more than one vector position at O'Hare, the center runway can descend below 7,000 feet if they remain clean with both the middle runway and the low runway. Can I get a show of hands? You guys kind of understand what I mean by center runway high, middle runway, low runway? If you understand what I'm talking about there. Okay, good. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. At least I know you're awake. This is cool. A lot of times on VATSIM, what I've experienced is you'll run duals more than you'll run triples. Duals, real easy. You have a low side, you have a high side. Low side, make sure you're at, it's more complex than the high side. And the reason why is because you have to be at 4,000 before you get to within 3 miles of the final. So that means you're going to do a lot of vectoring for separation. If you're not counting your miles or employing C to A, which we won't have time to cover tonight, sorry, but we will cover it. The low side could be quite a bear for you. On the high side, you're working typically 5,000 feet and up. So you have tons of room, tons of space to be able to do your job. Trips are different. On trips, typically we run center runway high. On VATSIM, I see that you guys pretty much just use center high, which is good. Center high makes things very easy because you have the Shane arrival from the east, the Watson arrival from west flow, and that takes aircraft right to the center runway and keeps it out of conflict of both downwinds. So the north downwind is low side, south downwind, middle runway. And you can see by the altitudes, as long as you're at those altitudes and you have plenty of airspace to get these aircraft from 7,000 down to 4 or 5 or 6 on the south side, it's usually not an issue to run approaches there. The time when this becomes complex is if you're the south runway, running the middle, and you get heavy jets from Cubs or anything from the Cubs sector on west flow or the farm sector on east flow. Being able to merge those two streams, but just keep in mind, if you keep it simple and understand that if you have a tie, the straight in aircraft is always easier to make number one than the downwind aircraft. Because with the downwind aircraft, it's like trying to merge into traffic. The guy that's on the highway already doing 55 miles an hour pretty much has a right of way unless you're sure you're going to get that turn and everything completed without having to have that guy on the highway already hit the brakes. That's about the best analogy I can make to that. On VATSIM, because we don't run monitors on VATSIM, visual approaches versus ILS approaches are kind of a moot point. On VATSIM, we're all self-monitoring our finals. In real life, whenever we have triple simul ILS approaches or duals, even if they're not widely spaced, meaning 2-7 right, 2-8 center, or 9 left, 10 center. If we're not widely spaced, then we have to have a monitor position for every local position that has an arrival runway. So we have a controller that has override capability for local control. And their job is basically just to prevent a blunder or a mid-air collision if an aircraft blunders away from the final approach course. We have special radars and stuff that are on a 4-to-1 magnification, meaning for every mile that we're painting east-west, we're painting 4 miles north-south. And what it ends up doing is a 5-degree turn will look like a 20-degree turn or a 25-degree turn. It makes it real easy to spot when an aircraft is blundering off the final. So you're looking at your airspace maps, you're studying, you get all that. You know what your arrival airspace is. You see what south satellite airspace is, but what is departure? Departure is everything else. So if you know what arrival owns on whatever configuration you're on, and you know what south satellite owns on the configuration you're on, you know as departure, you have literally everything else. And knowing that is going to be like 3/4 of battle for you learning how to work departures out of C90's airspace and towards the center. So A lot of these I may get wrong because I'm so used to real world or IRL. And some of these are different to make it simpler for VATSIM. In other words, for West Departure, we have slightly different procedures than what we have here. But basically, if you're within 20 miles of the main bang at O'Hare or O'Hare Airport, within a 20-mile range ring, anything above 4,000 needs to go to departure or it needs to be pointed out to departure. And by that, I'm referring to South Satellite, North Satellite, whatever you might be working. If you're going above 4,000, you're within 20 miles of O'Hare, you either need to point them out to departure or you need to have departure work them if you're not comfortable pointing them out and climbing yourself. Does anyone have any questions so far? Because I've thrown a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, I see you.
Yeah, go ahead. What do you got?
Oops, I'm stuck. So I was just gonna ask with the whole, pre-range coordination with departure and then feeder, how does that kind of tie into where departure owns all other airspace? How does that work together?
All right, let me. All right, we'll just use West Flow here. If you look at the Y feeder and the X feeder, 7,000 is arrivals airspace up to about 25 miles, and then 8,000. And the reason why it looks weird from the south is because South Satellite actually owns 7,000 and below outside of 25 miles from O'Hare. So if I'm working, say, West Departure, and South Satellite gives me a PQ, a midway PQ, climbing. I don't know. Can you guys see my mouse pointer? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm working a South Satellite PQ here, climbing. I don't have to stay at 6,000 all the way through feeder's airspace. Let's say there's no Plano arrivals. There's nothing here. I'm just going to go to PQ and climb to 13. Now, let's say there's only 2 arrivals and I have a nice gap I can climb in that no matter what arrival does with their airplanes, they're not going to conflict with mine. That's the key. No matter what arrival does, they're not going to hurt you. Then you have a clean climb. What constitutes a clean climb is subjective in nature, so keep that in mind. What might make me nervous about it being a clean climb may not make Zach nervous if they're training you. So if all else fails and you think that one arrival might be a conflict with your departure, well, then just go to 6,000. And what I usually do is like to point the aircraft towards this little space between DuPage and Aurora, about a 280, 290 heading. And as soon as I'm clean from arrival, I'll go to PQ and climb. And that way, I'm not hurting anyone. The aircraft is still pointed westbound for a westbound departure, and everyone is relatively happy, except Southwest Airlines. Hi, Joe. So, same thing with any northbounds coming off of Midway. In real life, we have 2 procedures we use. Fox at 4, where we go outside the 20 at 4,000 feet, or North at 6, where we point out to departure, hand off to the North departure, climbing to 6,000, and we let departure deal with climbing through O'Hare arrival. Most of the guys just point out to departure going to 15, and we find a gap to climb through, and we go. When you're training, err on the side of conservative at first, and then as you get more comfortable with figuring out where to look, you'll gain a little more familiarity where you can get away with climbing and that stuff. But again, on that, I would lean on your instructors, for those of you in training, on where to go and what to do. A lot of this, again, is IRL. It's extremely subjective in nature. We show you the basic procedures for what to do, and then it's, okay, well, that was not a good call, and we try to explain it in the back and debrief. Yeah, did that answer your question about climbing reference?
Yeah.
Okay.
Joe wanted to speak. for a second.
Yeah, Joe.
Oh, I was just waving my hand because you had said my name. That's all.
Come on, I had to call out Southwest Airlines once.
No, I guess the only thing I would say about that is we do, obviously you know this. I guess I'm only saying it but yeah, I mean we obviously out of Midway get 4 a lot, especially going west. And it kind of hit me when you said that on occasion you do get climbed up to 6, but I never really understood why a lot of those hold downs, especially the 6. But what you just said just made perfect sense.
Yeah, so going back to it, on VATSIM, what I've noticed is that a lot of times pilots are doing 250 knots up this corridor from Plano. In real life, we're doing 300 knots or greater. And if it's a west flow kind of a day, where's the jet stream and the wind coming out of typically? They're coming out of the west or the southwest. So these fellows here from Plano have a ton of wind on them. Sometimes they're doing 400 knots at 11,000 feet. And I'll tell you right now, good luck picking a good gap to climb in when your aircraft of departure is doing about 240 across the ground and the arrival that your climbing reference is doing 410. It's days like that, you're better off staying at 6, for a less stressful kind of a day. And that's what typically happens, especially on West Flow, because these guys are just hauling the mail coming in. And we're not starting them down till about the 20 or sometimes even the 10-mile ring. And part of the reason why is because as we look at where these fixes are, where they have to turn on, we're turning at a minimum a 16-mile final. They have a long way to fly yet, so we're trying to let them go as fast as they can for as long as possible so you can kind of get out there, is what we say a lot.
Even with the vertical sense, even in the center, you got a guy screaming across eastbound. You're going to stop your departure below him because you could turn him, or you could just level him off at altitude below him. Altitude is always the easiest way.
Absolutely. And the tricky thing when you're working departure in C90 is that, again, arrival owns the sky. Keep that in mind. Even though there's set feeder airspace, in real life, if an arrival needs to deviate, well, arrival owns the sky. You're missing O'Hare arrival. So that means you stay at 5,000 if you don't have a clean climb. On VATSIM, I mean, you might occasionally get the pilot that blunders outside of their RNAV arrival. I've heard those things can happen. So keep that in mind if you notice, an arrival not doing what it's supposed to do. Make sure that you establish some form of positive separation as quickly as you can. So, let's see.
Kevin, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you. So
Sorry.
2 things. No, yeah, no problem. Yeah, 2 things. What was that Fox at 4 that you mentioned?
Yeah,
Oh, like the Fox River.
exactly. It's the Fox River. So we have 2 point out procedures, general point outs. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. Short 4, and what we don't have here is Fox at 4. Fox at 4 is not usually used. But this is when North Satellite is decombined on VATSIM. IRL, North Sat's almost always decombined. So on VATSIM, if North Satellite is actually open, you guys are really busy, first of all. Second, this typically happens, short 4, on East Flow when you have a midway northbound departure, because Sector 1, working that departure, has to turn departure somewhere northeastbound and climb to the top of their airspace, which within 20 miles of O'Hare is 4,000. So because they're climbing to 4,000, there's a chance that departure is going to encroach on North Sat's airspace. Hence, you got to point them out. Our phraseology we use to do that point out short 4, Southwest Umpty Squad. And North Satellite almost always says point out approved, because if there is traffic, that traffic is coming from North Satellite to Sector 1 at 4,000. So there'll be some coordination to be had there. Foxtrot 4 is the exact mirror opposite of that on the west side of the airport. And again, that's used on West Flow. Does that answer your question?
Makes a
Yeah, it does.
glossary there.
It's good to know that there's like another option because we've always like been taught to climb aircraft over O'Hare at 6, which is what you mentioned. So I didn't know. It's new to me that there's a mirror image procedure of short.
Yeah, we have a backup procedure that we use, and I say that with a certain tone because in 11-ish years, 12, whatever, how many years at the TRACON, I've seen Foxtrot 4 used 3 times. By like a midway northbound departure, where it was put out Foxtrot 4 and shipped to north departure, with that procedure. It's just almost every south satellite controller takes the guy to 6,000 with a point out to south and west departure, and then ships to north departure on some northerly heading at 6. So my suggestion would be, if you're training, teach how to go to 6 and make the point out quickly. Being on Discord here is like being in the control room with everyone else you're working with. And you guys are lucky. You get to have a backtrack while I'm talking too.
And then my second question is, I just wanted to clarify too. You said that departure owns the sky, and as long as you can avoid traffic, departure can climb into feeder's airspace. So that definitely does not apply the other way. If we have departure decombined, feeder can't just send people direct Vulcan and Kirk if they're gonna encroach outside of the airspace. Is that right?
No, and that's what I was going to get into, is that because we were talking about departures here. Yeah, so Arrival owns the sky. However, Arrival is supposed to stay inside the feeder airspace. They can't just willy-nilly go wherever they want to go because they own the sky. No. What I mean by Arrival owns the sky is, as things get more
complicated, right?
No, it's Arrival owns the sky.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we're kind of getting ahead here, so I'm going to have to take a note on that and get back to it, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
All right. So talk about North Satellite really quick, because I don't think you guys open this much, do you, Zach?
No, I think I've seen North Sat open one time.
Just know that if you're North Satellite, you have no altitudes. You're 4,000 feet pretty much everywhere, except 25 miles north of O'Hare, which is exactly like, 6 miles of airspace that you have to play with at 5,000. So understand you have 2 altitudes to play with. You're not going to be able to do much without coordinating with every other departure position that's open. And if North Satellite is open, then at a minimum, South departure will be open as well. So you'll have at least 2 other departure positions if you have to open North Satellite. So South Satellite, there will be times where you'll split this off, and Zach and I experienced that for a couple of Friday night ops. Keep in mind, the best way to decombine South Sat is to split the work at Midway. So the way Midway works is you have basically 4 major configurations: 31 center, 2 left, 4 right, 13 center. On 4 right and 13 center, Sector 2 will be the Arrival controller. They'll be the ones that'll be vectoring the final, doing all the final sequencing and whatnot. Sector 1 and Sector 4 will be working all departures. 31 center, Sector 1 will be working arrivals. Sector 2 will be working all the departures. And then 2 left, I don't think you have a Sector 4. You do have a Sector 4. 2 left, Sector 4 would actually do the vectoring, but they're trying to change the SOP. I don't know if it'll happen anytime soon, to make it more coincide with all the other configurations. In any case, the east side does the arrivals on 2 left and 31 center. West side does the arrivals on 13 center and 4 right. Pardon me.
Yeah, all of our splits with South Sat, we always have 1 and 4 combined.
Right. And in fact, in real life, we have 1 and 4 combined 99% of the time. In fact, the only time we really regularly open sector 4 is during Oshkosh. So all the altitudes and everything you can look at there, but what I was looking for is a basic map to use. But it looks like this one doesn't have it. So anyways, we'll use this and use our imagination right over Kokomo. We have Midway. Your basic vector pattern for Midway should be as simple as possible. If you're 31 center, I usually just stay on the arrival till I go base and then go in. If you wait until Gamma, looking at the arrival chart and looking at your CRC map, in fact, I might be able to just bring up CRC to show you what my settings are. So let me see if I could do that really quick.
Everybody wants to show off their settings.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Just like my blue RAM.
Nobody likes blue.
Yeah, we do.
All right, let me see if I can.
Raise your hand if you like blue RAM.
Notice nobody raises their hand.
Is there a way to put a thumbs down?
All right, hang on a second. Okay. Oh, I just lost CRC. Give me a second, guys. Sorry, I was running all over the place today.
It's if you go to your settings and go to video, voice and video, and scroll all the way down to screen share.
Oh no, yeah.
There's a thing that says use our advanced technology. Make sure that's off,
Oh,
and then I'll let you.
oh, let's try it this way. Oh, it's gonna take a few minutes, sweetie. All right, you guys can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, this might be a little bit easier to see the screen because it's darker. So let me zoom in on Midway and just show you guys the general traffic pattern. I usually don't put up any of the star maps, but that's me. I'm weird like that. So those are O'Hare. Again, I'd never use them, so. So for 31, I typically take them right over here. This is WLS radio tower. I let them fly the star, go base around here, and then in. It's a nice 10-mile final. Nobody squawks about that. And then from the east, I just go direct to. God, it's been a long day.
Hills.
I go direct. What's that?
Hills.
I either use Hills or. God, I forgot to fix.
Gleam.
I can't believe this. Gleam, thanks. Like I said, it's been a long day. I typically go direct Gleam or Hills. As it gets busier or I need to build a gap, what I'll do is I'll leave the aircraft over Halley and either go southwest and then in. That'll build you a gap real quick if you need a manufacturer gap. Or I'll have them depart Halley on a 280 heading to intercept. And that also helps. What?
If you like those pictures I just sent you, I got diagrams with all those fixes on them. Take a look at each.
Oh, you do? Oh, hot dog. Yeah. Absolutely. Let me see if I can figure out a way to bring these in really quick. Oh, yeah. So let me bring up 13 center first, or 31 center first. So what I mean is, these are the basic stars. This is thanks to Joe. This is awesome stuff here. I usually allow the aircraft to just fly the star after Gaga. If you go base after Gaga to a 50 heading, that'll take the aircraft direct to Gleam. So I usually like to wait about a mile and a half. And by the time the turn is made, I can turn to intercept. And then it's just simple phraseology. You over Gleam, clear to LS, 31 center, contact tower at once. And it's less I have to talk which for me being a lazy IRL controller, I'm going to talk as little as I possibly can. So there is that. Thanks, Joe. Did you guys want to see the other configurations, or were you guys good? Anyone? Like, raise your hand if you want to go through all of them, or if you want to move on. Yeah, that's hard to do. All right.
I have a question from the online question. How does departure climbing within the ADA work? Is it the same as normal climbing in reference to the traffic?
Yeah, it's the exact same. So O'Hare Tower has an LOA with us where they can depart on a heading parallel to the dump. We call them dumps, but yes, the ADA, the arrival descent area. On West Flow, that would be either a 40 or a 140 heading. We have control to turn into the ADA as long as we turn into clean from O'Hare arrival at or above 2,500 feet. So just make sure your departure's at or above 2,500. Now, if you're looking here, if you have an aircraft coming out here on a 40 heading and you're turning into a dump here, keep in mind the arrivals are going to be at about 2,300 right here at the markers. So what I usually tell trainees is you need to use everything you've got to figure out if this is a good move or not. Risk reward is what I like to say. So how much risk are you incurring on the operation to do what you need to do? And how much reward are you really getting out of it? Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, just adding on to that. So you said it is climbing in reference. So I was reading something about, the uncommon boundary, and I wasn't exactly sure what all that meant.
So common and uncommon boundary. Common boundary is where you guys already know from radar basics that you got to do 1.5 miles from any other boundary. That's how far you have to keep your arrival or your aircraft from another airspace boundary within 40 miles of main bang. Fusion is different because in Fusion and with ERAM, you don't necessarily have to give that much room. Center can go down to 3 miles. So them using 3 miles means you can do 1.5 miles from a center sector boundary. That's common boundary. Uncommon boundary, let me bring up the feeder airspace here on CRC. All this feeder airspace is uncommon boundary, meaning that technically departure needs to be at least 3 miles away from all the feeder airspace, and feeder can operate aircraft right up onto the uncommon boundary. Does that make sense now?
Yeah, I think I was speaking more about how the ADA had, or maybe that was just an explanation or demonstration in the SOP. It was something about an uncommon and common boundary in the SOP.
Yep, and that's what we mean by common and uncommon boundaries. It's mostly for feeder airspace, but there are some arrival airspace ports that also have uncommon boundaries. For instance, the within 15-mile center area or surface area for O'Hare arrival, say on West Flow, that's an uncommon boundary, meaning arrival can go all the way to 15 out and operate, and North Satellite and South Satellite have to remain at least 3 miles away. That means 18 miles from O'Hare as they're operating on West Flow. And the whole point is to ensure separation between two. In real life, if I see that O'Hare arrive, if I'm North Satellite and I see O'Hare arrival operating out here, I am out here. I am out at the 25-ish ring if I see that are going all the way to the 15 with O'Hare arrivals. It typically only happens when there's weather, so at that point, there's not going to be that many North Satellite aircraft anyways. Any other questions? All right. So when I talk about foul line versus front line, sideline, this is what I'm referring to. Almost nobody uses our RCP. It's in our SOP. It's everywhere. Because we had to call it something since we basically decommissioned the O'Hare VOR, and we don't say the main bang, and we can't just say the main bang in the SOP. But in reality, what we're talking about when we're talking about our RCP is we're talking about the main bang that's located just south of 27 left. We're talking about that one point and all of our airspace and everything being centered around that one point. So my advice that I give trainees is don't change your range rings around to other things, because your airspace, everything that you use is going to be centered around that point. So if you need to change your range rings for whatever reason, I would advise that you change them right back as soon as you can.
Yeah,
Nate brings up. Go ahead, Zach.
I tell all my students everything is defined. The range ring center point is your God. Everything is defined by the range ring center point. And also, I just wanted to clarify that wasn't defined by the O'Hare VOR. It was the old O'Hare West radar site.
You're exactly right. So the next thing we're talking about is the uncommon boundary. And you can see by the blue dashed lines, that's what we mean by uncommon boundary, meaning arrival owns all the way to the boundary. So if you're sector 3 trying to run arrivals or trying to run DuPage arrivals and you're at 5,000, you need to be 3 miles away from this point. And again, common sense being common sense, if you see O'Hare arrival and they're at 5,000 out here, I suggest you get to 4 or even 3,000 and get out of Dodge. Because chances are, if they're out here with one aircraft, the next aircraft's going to be over to Cal. And they might point them out to you, they might not, but you don't want to be stuck there, because really, arrivals having a tough enough job as it is. Just stay out of their way as much as you can.
Yeah,
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I got a question. Sorry to bring us back to the range ring conversation.
Yeah.
Is the O'Hare class Bravo, the definition and the center of the O'Hare class Bravo, is that slightly off from the range ring center point?
Yep,
So-
sure is.
With the O'Hare Bravo, it's centered on the airport, and you can kind of see that there's some demarcations on that scope, like the two dots every now and again. Those mark the O'Hare Bravo on the scope. But your
So-
range ring center point is going to be centered on that Old West radar site.
So
Okay.
really, the class Bravo was centered on the old O'Hare VOR, which
Gotcha.
was just northeast of the intersection between 22 right and 27 left. That VOR has been long since decommissioned and gone. However, the Bravo boundaries and everything have not changed. But everything was based off of the O'Hare VOR, and the reason why was because when the class Bravo was first constructed, I mean, back then it was just VOR DME navigation. That was the top technology of the day. So,
Are you able to dot find GCO and zoom in?
let's see.
It has to be in the stars.
Nope, it's not there. Oh,
you have
I
to
don't.
do it in stars,
You
not
gotta
the.
do it in
that's-
stars.
Oh.
Yeah.
I
So
see.
Click into stars. Dot find GCO.
Click in. Oh, gotcha. There it is. So that was where the O'Hare VOR used to be.
All right, I was just curious because I've noticed from a while ago that the Bravo isn't centered on the Bravo and my range rings
Nope.
don't line up, and it's always bothered me. So
It 100% is not. So what we typically do in real life, if we see someone that's coming close to where we know the Bravo boundary is, we'll bring up the Bravo map ourselves to look. Are they in the Bravo? Are they not? They're not? Okay. Not a big deal. Nate is providing some really good reference points on a lot of the stuff we're talking about. So he's got some the point of origin on the old O'Hare VOR location. If you guys want to read into that stuff. So,
And if I might be wrong, but I believe the O'Hare VOR was decommissioned down to just the GCO DME, Chicago DME.
correct. So there's really nothing to navigate off of. The DME is there, and the whole reason why the DME is there, I think, is for the Bravo.
It's also for the climb via SID because your
Oh, they're still using it. Correct.
climb restriction is off the Chicago DME.
Yep. So, what is a feeder airspace? It's that simple. You got northwest feeder, northeast, southwest, southeast. So that's basically how it works. To keep things real simple on working a feeder airspace, how do you feed arrivals? What I typically tell my trainees, if you're the north feeder, because we typically split either north feeder, south feeder. Makes things a lot simpler than if you try to do a far west side feeder or a near side feeder. If you do a north-south feeder split, the north feeder will typically feed the north runway. South feeder will typically feed the south runway. It just makes things a whole lot easier because there's a lot less of counting for multiple runways going on. If you remember in the beginning, I said, when you're feeding, you're an extension of the final controllers. So if you have enough aircraft where you're counting 10, 12 aircraft and you need to slow a guy 20 miles out to 180 knots because that's where he fits, that's what you have to do as a feeder. Now, if you're doing that for more than one runway, your complexity, your workload increases immensely. So just something to keep in mind when you're working events on VATSIM. Anyways, if you're a south feeder feeding a south runway, you go 7,000. North feeder, north runway, 7,000. If you're going from north to south, you go to 8,000 and you give it to the south feeder. If you're the south feeder, go on north side, and we call those turn-ins. If you look at a glossary, turn-in is basically any arrival that's going to a runway other than what it would naturally go to. You look at the X feeder, these planes kind of naturally flow into the south runway. Same thing for the Y feeder for a north runway. So, the altitudes are basically just there to kind of keep things on an even keel to make it as simple as possible. Does anyone have any questions about basic feeding, altitudes, whatnot? Like I said, I promised Joe we will go over a C to A and what exactly is C to A and how to count miles. It would be a very rough lesson because we have trainees that learn for years on how to do C to A, and it's not an easy concept to master. So this is basically your dumps as each runway. Keep in mind, if you're the low side, you only own 8 to 4, except within 15 miles of O'Hare. High side, the center runway high, you own above what the low side owns. You own above what the middle runway owns. If you keep that in mind, so if you know what the low side owns, you know what the middle owns, high side owns everything else. And that's the way I keep track of all of that stuff. So, again, out to about 25 miles, you own up to 8,000. That's to take all those Bears and Kokomo, the VEC arrivals, to bring them in, get them descended into your dump. Now, there is one error on this. You do own 6 to 4,000 out here. However, we don't use that altitude. We never go below 5,000 on the south runway. And the reason why, there's two reasons why. One, typically, if we're west flow at O'Hare, what configuration do you think we'll be at midway? 2-2 left. Correct. And that's why we have a 5,000 foot cutout here on the south runway. So because of that, we just stay at 5,000 plus that's your lowest run. That's your lowest altitude you're going to go to as the middle runway, anyways. So we just don't use 4,000 there. We use 5,000 one way or the other, even though you technically own 4. East flow is basically a mirror of west flow when it comes to all of this. The key thing to keep in mind is that you will see a lot more traffic outside the F dump here and outside and underneath the W dump here. Or this would be the H dump, depending on which configuration you guys decide to run. Biggest thing to keep in mind on the south runway, if you're vectoring the south runway, you find yourself out here, just don't go below 6,000 feet. And if you don't do that, then you can go all the way out to Rockford's airspace if you need to. Once you go to 5, you're committing to staying within 30 miles of O'Hare. As a low side, you're committed to staying within 30 miles of O'Hare. So that's things to keep in mind. And then, of course, the high side owns everything that the other runways do not. I'm going to tell you guys right now that when it comes to 4 right and 2 twos, I have seen 4 right since we've gone to these configurations. I have seen 4 right twice. And in both times, it was snowing. Wind gusts were up to 40 knots. And we had about a 30 arrival rate, meaning we were landing 30 arrivals an hour. 2 twos is about the same. So you're just not going to see much of that. Although, I think this might be reversed. Yeah.
It is. The labels are reversed.
Yeah, but whatever. I mean, I think everyone knows what we're talking about here. If you're using these configurations, I don't know. I think West and East flow are complex enough. I don't know if you'd want to introduce more.
Yuvan has a question.
Go ahead. Yuvan?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Alright, so can you go back up to the final east flow?
Yeah.
Airspace.
You want this one?
No, the airspace one that showed where, yeah, that one. So
Okay.
their north runway has 8 to surface in that section, but that also is kind of like the DuPage
So-
RNAV.
You see this cutout right here?
Yep.
That's to allow for DuPage to have most operations. In real life, right now, our configuration, whenever DuPage is landing 20 right, and we're east flow, is to do the ILS 10 circle 20 right.
So
Currently,
just stay away from finals.
basically, is what we do. We stay out of arrival's way. We are working on an automated procedure where we could run the RNAV 20 right into DuPage with an automated point out to the north final. We just haven't gotten that codified into an SOP yet. But that's what it would basically take. It would take some kind of automated procedure to allow for that to happen. The recent
like a point
creation
out to B and whatever that is that F wouldn't work.
Sector 3 would basically point out, well, as it is now, in order to run the RNAV 20 right approach, Sector 3 has to point out every DuPage arrival to North Satellite. That has to happen currently. What we don't do is a point out to the F controller on all those guys because Arrival has enough work to do than to add, hey, go miss this guy running the approach. And again, we're working on procedures whereby we could do an automated point out. I forgot. Does CRC now do automated
Yes.
point outs or not?
Yes.
Okay.
When it's splat, it'll turn him yellow on their screen.
Okay. Well, that's good. Well, no, what I don't mean by splat turn them yellow. We have a command where we type F splat and then slew enter,
Yeah,
And
we have that.
you do have that. Okay. I didn't know if that was implemented here.
That's what I meant. Is it
Okay.
forces the data block on them?
Perfect.
They click on it. It sends PO flashing on the data block to them. If you do UN, it'll flash UN on their data block.
Okay. Yuvan, did that answer your question?
Yeah, so basically, even though you kind of get into finals airspace, just pretend like it won't affect final, or just give them the circle in.
Yeah, I would either give ILS 10 circle. This being VATSIM, I think you're fine by just pointing them out to the F final. Something simple as point out 20 west to do page, RNAV 20 right. Anybody that's working the F final is going to know exactly what you're talking about. And I would be shocked if anyone said anything other than point out approved, because it's incredibly easy for O'Hare to arrival to miss a guy running the RNAV 20 right approach. The only reason why we don't have it codified in an SLP yet is because we just haven't gotten there yet. I mean, things work incredibly slow when you get to the federal government level, or anyone really.
Layer in Uven. Yeah, to layer in Uven, Duckby, the initial approach fix is actually smack dab in that 8 to service
Yep.
area, like you said. But it's at 3, so East final should never have a downwind at 3, right? So I theoretically it'll work, and a point out should work, But
yeah, absolutely. Like I said, if I'm
to
you,
NorthSat too, because once he leaves that airspace, he's in NorthSat, right?
right. Again, that I feel is implied, because you would be required to point that aircraft out to North Satellite no matter what. So that will be required for you to run the RNAV 20 right approach. You'll have to point them out to North Satellite, because the RNAV 20 right, Duckby is smack dab in the middle of their airspace.
Or they could have arrived from the north, and it's NorthSat working him.
Yeah, which we do all the time as well. NorthSat flashes a Sector 3. Sector 3 takes a handoff. NorthSat calls, says, you want to work or watch this guy? Point out approved. And NorthSat will ship straight to DuPage Tower at the appropriate point. Kevin, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to comment on that. That's
Yeah. So that's basically everything in a nutshell. The rest of the Arrival airspaces, I'm not going to go over really. Just keep in mind, if you know what Arrival owns, and then you know what South Satellite owns, you've got most of it in the bag. Because now you know what Departure owns, you know where you really can go, and you'll find out that there's not a lot of places that are really, really safe where you can go. Everybody else owns a little something somewhere. So working C90 when you're in an event will typically end up involving some sort of coordination. Luckily, with departure to arrival, that's very few and far between, because as long as you're making clean climbs, there shouldn't have to be a whole lot of coordination. But between departure, and NorthSat and SouthSat, yeah, there's quite a bit of coordination that ends up happening in real life. Does anyone have any questions or anything?
Make me want to stay at ZME more and more every time I talk to you.
Well, I'm not going to talk you into it. I'll definitely tell you that. I don't know, Joe, if you're interested, we could, talk about doing something in like a week or whatnot, maybe C to A, or run a sweatbox or something like that, if that sort of thing is possible. We could talk later about that.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, I know. We worked on that swap box to see about doing some sort of Southsat Master Class. So yeah, I still want to do that. We can get together and try to figure out when we want to do that or how.
Yeah, with the turnout we got tonight, I'd be happy to do something like that and kind of show different techniques and stuff that would help you as you're going through your training, you being the students in this class. So, anyone else have any other questions or anything?
Raise your hand now or forever hold your peace.
Yeah. I try to keep it at under 90 minutes. I think I got pretty close. So, in any case, it's my first time doing this, and it was kind of ad lib. So, any feedback you guys have, you're not hurting my feelings, but I do appreciate it. Just hit me up on Discord, or you can hit me up in the chat. Either way, it is all good. I appreciate you guys attending.
Thanks, Mark, for your
Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely. You guys take care.